I clearly remember the moment everything fell apart. That room was full, illuminated by yellow lights that created an atmosphere of party and celebration. But for me, it was the stage where I would expose the biggest lie of my life. The music was still playing, people were smiling and toasting, completely oblivious to the fact that they were about to witness the end of a marriage. My wedding. I watched her from afar, her eyes glassy, barely blinking, as she laughed, toasted, socialized as if nothing was wrong. But I knew. I spent weeks waiting for that moment, collecting every piece of evidence, piecing together a perfect picture of her betrayal. She thought she had everything under control. Fake smiles, calculated looks, fake kisses, everything to hide the truth. He promised an amicable separation, he said he wanted everything to be peaceful, that he respected what we experienced together. Little did I know that she was deceiving me, that every sweet word was just a strategy, a preparation to take as much as she could before leaving. She wanted everything. House, bills, cars. She planned to win, and I would be the loser. I realized she never intended to do it cleanly. When I discovered that she was secretly advocating to get out of the marriage with almost anything, I realized I was faced with a choice: shut up and let her destroy me, or fight back with every ounce of strength I had. I chose the second option. And I chose to do this in the most public way possible, so that everyone present could see her mask fall. Because when you find out that the person you love is not only cheating on you with someone else, but planning to ruin you financially, the world around you changes. It's like a slap in the face that doesn't stop burning. You don't just want justice. He wants revenge. As I walked across the room, heading towards the microphone, I felt heat rising through my body. It was anger, disappointment, an almost uncontrollable desire to confront her there, in front of everyone. But I waited. I waited for the right moment, to make sure she couldn't dodge. People greeted me as I passed by, still having no idea what was about to happen. It was a perfect setting. She was at the center of the party, accompanied by her lover, without even imagining that I knew everything. That I had read the messages, listened to the calls, discovered the secret meetings. And now, I was about to do the same to her. As soon as I touched the microphone, the sound echoed, drowning out the surrounding conversations and laughter. Everyone's attention was drawn to me. "Good evening," I began, trying to keep my voice steady even with the adrenaline running high. I could feel her eyes turning to me in surprise. She thought I was going to make a banal speech, maybe just a thank you. I wasn't planning on speaking today, but I thought it was a good opportunity to share some important news. The silence in the room became denser, heavier. I could see some people frown, curious. Over the last few months, I continued, I've been thinking a lot about what trust means. About how we build our lives alongside someone, believing that we share the same values, the same feelings. But today I discovered that that's not true for all. She was still smiling, as if she didn't understand what was about to happen. As if she were shielded by the certainty that her plans would not be revealed. But I was about to rip that security away from her. For those who don't know, I continued, this will be a night of revelations. And they are not revelations that I would like to make, but they are necessary. Her hands tightened around the wine glass. She knew something was wrong. I could feel it. I could see the panic starting to appear in her eyes. My wife, I continued, looking directly at her now, has been the woman of my life. I gave her everything. My love, my trust, my support. But what she gave me in return was a betrayal, and not just a betrayal of love, but an even deeper betrayal. She promised that our separation would be amicable, that she would respect what we lived through, and while I believed those promises, she planned behind my back a calculated divorce, coldly planned to take almost everything. What I have. The impact was immediate. Some murmured in shock, others turned to look at her, who was now pale, her lips parted, unable to formulate a response. She was lying to me, I continued, voice firmer, louder. And while she was pretending to be my partner, my accomplice, she was at her lover's side, hatching what she thought was a perfect plan. But her plan ended here. Today. At that moment, the entire room turned to look at her and the man next to her. He looked just as uncomfortable as she did, as if he had suddenly been exposed under a spotlight that illuminated all of his lies. She tried to open her mouth to say something, but I interrupted her. "I have the proof," I announced, taking from my pocket the documents she had signed, the messages exchanged, the details of the hidden meetings. "And today I expose all of this here, so that everyone knows who you really are." I don't know if I've ever felt so much relief mixed with so much pain. Seeing her expression fall, surprise turned to panic, and panic turned to a desperate attempt to explain the inexplicable. She murmured, looking around, looking for support. But there was no support. There was no one who could defend her there. "I'm done talking. And one more thing," I added, feeling the weight of the words as I released them. "I'm asking for a divorce. And, contrary to what you wanted, everyone is on my side." Shock ran through the hall like a wave. People began to whisper, stare, some clearly uncomfortable, others trying to absorb what they had just heard. Her lover looked around, as if looking for a way out. She looked at me, perhaps hoping for some leniency. But there was no more compassion there. Just the naked truth that his charade was over. But there was one thing no one knew, something not even she could predict. A detail that had not yet been revealed, a trump card that I had kept hidden until now. And when I looked at her, I saw the fear deep in her eyes. I knew she knew there was something more. Something I hadn't said yet. But what could be so devastating? She thought I had already played all my cards. She was wrong. And when everything came to light, she would finally understand what it means to lose. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry an undeniable truth. Betrayal destroys lives, corrodes relationships and leaves marks that not even time can erase. Our goal is to show how lies and disloyalty can turn someone's world upside down. So, get ready for an intense story full of twists and turns, which will stir your emotions. Enjoy and good story. The soft sound of the piano echoed throughout the room, creating a warm and elegant atmosphere. The diffused light from the lamps bathed the room, giving a warm tone to the walls decorated with abstract paintings and green plants that stood out against the dark wooden furniture. There, in the heart of the house, was Mark Thompson, standing by the window. He looked outside, watching the street lights stretching into the distance, but his thoughts were miles away, lost in a silent whirlwind of doubts and memories. Mark was a meticulous man, always focused, the type of person who liked to have control over everything around him. He had built a solid career as a corporate lawyer, recognized for his calm demeanor and his ability to solve difficult problems without losing his composure. Over the years, Mark had become known for his dedication to his job and his unshakable calmness, even under pressure. That same calmness was what made him a trustworthy husband, always there and willing to support his wife, Emily. They were a couple who, in the eyes of many, had it all, a beautiful home, a comfortable lifestyle, and a relationship that seemed stable. But life is not always what it seems. Emily was Mark's opposite in many ways. Spontaneous, charismatic and passionate about life, she lit up any room she entered. Everyone adored her for her vibrant personality, her easy laugh and the loving way she treated others. He was the type of person who made friends surprisingly quickly, always smiling and willing to help. However, behind that easy smile, there was a complexity that few realized. Emily had her own desires, dreams, and frustrations, things she rarely shared, not even with Mark. Despite living together for years, she still felt stuck in certain aspects of her life, as if something essential was missing. The two met at a young age, in a local cafe, during a charity event organized by mutual friends. Mark was immediately attracted to Emily's infectious energy, the way she talked to people, making everyone around her feel special. She, in turn, saw a security in Mark that she had never experienced before. He was calm, steady, someone she knew she could trust. Before long, they were together, and the relationship seemed perfect from the outside. Mark was the firm pillar, Emily the guiding light, and for a long time, they balanced these dynamics well. Their marriage, in the early years, was full of love and complicity. There were spontaneous trips, romantic dinners, and lots of laughter shared over the little everyday things. Mark loved the feeling of having found someone who completed him, and Emily enjoyed the security of having someone by her side who supported her unconditionally. However, over the years, the routine set in. Mark became increasingly absorbed in his work, seeking to grow his career and reach new heights. Emily, on the other hand, threw herself into personal projects, trying to find a way to fill the emptiness she felt slowly growing inside her. She became involved in social events, volunteer work, and eventually began organizing parties and events for local businesses, something that gave her a sense of purpose that seemed to have disappeared from her marriage. Mark didn't realize it, but while he was busy consolidating his professional success, Emily was seeking something he couldn't give. It wasn't for lack of trying. He made a point of planning weekends together, short trips to places they knew they liked, but there always seemed to be a growing distance between them, a disconnect he didn't know how to fix. When he tried to ask, she would just smile and say that everything was fine, that it was just tired, but Mark felt that something was wrong, even if he couldn't quite put his finger on it. That night's party was a classic example of how Emily shined in her world. She walked around the room, greeting guests with warm smiles, asking questions that demonstrated a genuine interest in people's lives. She was wearing an elegant wine-colored dress that highlighted her striking presence. Mark watched from afar, proud of how she managed to make everyone feel welcomed, but at the same time, he felt a pang of frustration. He wanted to be part of that glow, he wanted to be included, but he didn't know how to fit into that world that seemed so exclusively hers. Meanwhile, Emily moved around the room with ease, chatting with everyone but always keeping on the move. She had learned to avoid long moments of silence with Mark, because it was in those moments that he asked questions she didn't know how to answer. Questions about the future, about how she felt, questions that forced her to face a truth she didn't want to admit even to herself. It was easier to keep the night moving, to smile, toast and pretend everything was perfect. And for a while, it worked. That night was important for them. Not because they were celebrating some special date, but because it was the first time in months that Mark had managed to leave work early to be present at something organized by Emily. He was determined to try again, to reconnect, to show her that he still cared. However, as the night progressed, he noticed small signs that indicated something was out of place. Looks exchanged, muffled laughs, people who stopped talking when he approached. At one point, he saw Emily move away to a more isolated corner of the room, whispering something into the phone. When she came back, her eyes were different, as if she had just heard something that affected her deeply. She approached Mark, smiled and asked if he was enjoying the evening. He smiled back, but couldn't help but notice the tone of his voice, which seemed distant. "Yes, of course," he replied, trying not to show that he had noticed the change. But his mind was now completely focused, trying to understand what was happening. What he didn't know was that Emily had spent weeks organizing all of this. And not just the party. She had been planning to walk out of his life for much longer than he could imagine. And to do that, she needed to keep up appearances, show that everything was normal, that their marriage was still solid, while she, in fact, prepared her silent exit. Mark didn't know it yet, but that night would be a turning point. And while he desperately tried to hold together the pieces of a marriage he believed was still intact, Emily was just a few steps away from revealing something that would change their lives forever. Without knowing it, he was still there, next to her, with a discreet smile and a look that mixed admiration and questioning. And that night, as the two moved in opposite directions, fate prepared to collapse the fragile structure that supported their relationship. And what would happen after that, neither Mark nor Emily could predict. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The morning after the party, he woke up early, but Emily was no longer in bed. Their routine always started with a brief coffee together, before heading to their respective appointments. But lately, she left earlier and earlier, always with the same excuse that she had a lot to do. He got up, made himself coffee, and stood in the kitchen, staring out the window, feeling the emptiness in the apartment echo around him. The smell of coffee used to warm the morning, but that day, it only reinforced how strange and distant everything seemed. The days that followed were marked by disconcerting moments. Emily always seemed busy, immersed in messages and connections. When Mark tried to get closer, she diverted, changing the subject, saying that she had to resolve something urgent for the next event she was organizing. He saw her spontaneous laughs as she looked at her phone, laughs that he hadn't been able to get for a long time. Deep down, Mark was beginning to recognize that something was out of place, but he didn't want to admit to himself what that might mean. The idea that she might be hiding something deeper was too disturbing to confront directly. But doubts began to intensify. He remembered how Emily always made a point of including him in her plans, how excited she was to tell him about new projects, new contacts she had made. Now she was vague, evasive, and when he persisted in asking, she smiled, but her eyes remained distant. "I'm just tired, Mark. Things are a little chaotic, but it will pass," she said, trying to reassure him. He wanted to believe, wanted to think that everything would go back to normal eventually, but something inside him knew that that tranquility was superficial, just a facade to hide something he couldn't yet see. One day, when Mark arrived home from work early, he found Emily in their home office, talking quietly on the phone. She didn't notice his presence right away, and he had the chance to overhear a snippet of the conversation. "Yes, I know. I can't wait either, but we have to be careful." When she turned and saw Mark standing in the doorway, a mix of surprise and discomfort washed over her face. She hung up quickly, setting her cell phone aside, and gave him a nervous smile. She was just a customer, she said casually, but he could hear the tension in her voice. After that moment, Mark started paying more attention. He was determined to find out what was going on. He began to observe Emily's departures, the times when she said she was busy, and little by little, a pattern began to emerge. She always had an appointment in the afternoon, something she never went into detail about, and came home acting as if she had spent the whole day solving professional problems. He knew she liked her job as an event planner, but he had a feeling it was an excuse, a convenient cover. One afternoon, when Emily rushed out saying she was going to meet a supplier, Mark decided to follow her. He felt bad for acting like that, like a detective chasing a lead, but he needed to know the truth. The feeling of betrayal was eating him up inside, and he needed answers. He followed her in the car, keeping his distance, watching her drive through the streets to a more distant neighborhood. When she finally parked in front of a small cafe, he stopped across the street and waited. Emily got out of the car and, soon after, a man appeared and greeted her with a warm hug. Mark felt his heart sink, a mix of disbelief and anger exploding inside him. He knew that man, he had seen him in some photos of events that Emily organized, but he never knew they were so close. As the two chatted outside the cafe, laughing and looking at each other in a way Mark hadn't seen in years, he was forced to confront reality. The emotional distance he had been feeling was not the result of stress or tiredness. It was something much deeper, something he hadn't had the courage to admit until that moment. He continued to watch, becoming more and more certain of what was happening. He watched as the two entered the cafe, and time passed painfully slowly as he waited outside. When they finally left, Emily was holding the man's hand, and they shared a quick kiss before saying goodbye. That vision was the final blow. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. It was as if the world around him was falling apart, as if everything he knew and believed in was being ripped from his grasp. Mark returned home in a state of shock. He sat on the couch, feeling as if the entire weight of the world had fallen on his shoulders. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he wanted to confront, but there was also a paralyzing fear of facing the truth, of having to admit that his marriage had turned into a lie. When Emily arrived home hours later, acting as if nothing had happened, he realized he was ready for war. She greeted him with a smile, but he couldn't return it. He felt anger boiling inside him, an anger he knew he could no longer contain. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" Mark said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence of the room like a knife. Emily stopped, the smile disappearing from her face. "What are you talking about?" She tried to sound casual, but the nervousness showed through. Mark stood up, approaching her, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't hold back. "I know, Emily. I saw you guys today." Emily's expression instantly changed. She turned pale, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. Mark watched, seeing the moment the mask fell, and the truth was finally exposed. He knew there was no going back. The betrayal he had suspected was now staring him in the face, and there was no pretending that everything was fine. But as he looked at Emily, waiting for some explanation, some attempt to justify the unjustifiable, he realized he still didn't know everything. There was something more, something she was hiding. And that, he would soon discover. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, the room silent except for the sound of his own thoughts echoing, pounding his mind for an explanation he knew would never come. Emily had left early once again, and he stood there, staring into space, trying to absorb what he had discovered. The betrayal was like an open wound that he couldn't help touching, a pain that throbbed in every part of his body. He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to admit to himself that everything he knew had been destroyed in such a cruel way. But what tormented him most was the feeling that there was more. Emily had something hidden, something he couldn't fully see. And that need for answers gnawed at him. He couldn't leave things like this, couldn't just accept what had happened and move on. I needed to understand why, I needed to confront her, and know the truth, the whole truth. That afternoon, Mark decided to do something he never imagined he would do. He gathered all the documents he had, the evidence of the betrayal he had collected and put them in a folder. But while going through the papers in the office, he found something he didn't expect. A sealed envelope, addressed to Emily, but with her own name on the return address. This was strange, as he had never prepared an envelope like this, and for a moment, he was confused. When he finally opened it, he realized they were legal documents. His expression instantly changed as he read the first few lines. They were divorce papers. But not just any divorce papers. They were documents that showed that Emily had, weeks ago, started the separation process, but with terms that were clearly unfavorable to him. She had obtained the support of lawyers who prepared everything so that, in the end, she would keep almost all of the couple's assets and properties. Her plan was deeper than he imagined. And suddenly, all the pieces started to fall into place. The reason she acted so distant, the need to keep up appearances, the way she tried to avoid him. She was setting everything up while he naively tried to save the marriage. When Emily returned home that night, she found Mark in the office, papers spread out on the desk. He was standing, his hands steady, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and anger. "Are you really going to pretend nothing's happening, Emily?" he asked, his voice low but full of tension. She stopped at the entrance to the office, her gaze fixed on the papers, her expression contorted with surprise. "Mark, what is that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice controlled, but he noticed the subtle tremor. She knew the game was about to end, and he could see her internal struggle to try and stay calm. "You know very well what that is," replied Mark, coming closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "I found these papers, these plans you've been making behind my back. Promising an amicable divorce while trying to take everything. Why, Emily? Why do this to me? I thought you wanted to work things out. I thought there was still something among us that was worth saving." For a moment, Emily was silent. She looked at the papers, then at Mark, and took a deep breath, as if trying to gather her courage. "Mark, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I was trying to find a way to get out of this situation without hurting you more. But you made me act this way, you and your obsession with control." She started speaking faster, as if the words needed to come out before she could stop them. I was suffocating, trapped. I needed a way out. Mark shook his head in disbelief. A way out? So you decide to betray me, deceive me, and then take everything away from me? Is this your way out? Is this all I mean to you? A stumbling block. Emily looked at him with an expression that mixed sadness and frustration. You never understood, did you? You never wanted to understand. For you, it was always about keeping everything perfect, about making sure everything was under control. But I couldn't live like this anymore, Mark. I needed something more, something that made me feel alive. And that something else is someone else, Mark shot, his voice full of pain. Because I saw you guys. I saw you with him. She had no immediate response. He just lowered his head, his eyes fixed on the ground, as if words had suddenly failed him. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, it's someone else. The confession was like a punch in the gut. Mark felt the breath escape from his lungs, as if all the air had been knocked out at once. He wanted to scream, he wanted to cry, he wanted to understand why the world had become so cruel in the blink of an eye. But he needed to stand his ground. What about the divorce papers? Did you want me to just sign them and let you take everything? Is that it? Was that your idea of an amicable divorce? Emily looked at him, and her eyes finally lifted, showing a gleam of determination that he hadn't expected to see. Yes, Mark. Because you would never let me get off easy. You would never allow me to move on. I did what I needed to do to protect myself, to make sure I would have something after this was all over. He felt anger rising within him, but there was something more, a deep sadness, a feeling of betrayal that was difficult to describe. Protect yourself from what, Emily? From me? I never hurt you, I never did anything other than try to be better for you. I was an idiot, trying to save something you had already destroyed. She moved closer, almost as if she wanted to touch him, but stopped a few steps away. It's not about you, Mark. It never was. I lost myself in this marriage, and I did things I shouldn't have. I know that. But I needed to do something to regain control of my life. Control your life by stealing mine, he asked, his voice breaking for the first time. Is this how you regain control? Because it seems more like you wanted to get rid of me once and for all. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, before opening them again and looking at him with a resigned expression. You would never understand. And that's why there was no other way. There was a mixture of emotions in Mark, something between anger and sadness, a desperation to find something, anything, that would explain what had happened to the love he thought still existed between them. So you were really going to do this? You were going to destroy me without even looking back? She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her eyes changed. A final resolution, an acceptance of what he had done. Yes, Mark. I was going to do it. Because I was tired of being the woman you wanted me to be. I wanted to be free, even if it meant breaking you in the process. Her words were final, a blow he never imagined he would receive. Mark looked at her, trying to find something in her eyes that would prove that this was a lie, an exaggeration, but all he found was the naked truth. And as much as it hurt, he knew he needed to hear it. I needed to understand how far she was willing to go to free herself from what she saw as a prison. But you forgot one detail, Emily, he said, picking up the papers once more. These documents. I will use them, yes, but not in the way you thought. Because I discovered something. Something you weren't expecting. And when all this comes to light, the one who will end up with nothing, will be you. Silence settled between them, heavy and loaded with tension. Emily tried to remain calm, but her eyes betrayed a fear she was trying desperately to hide. She realized she had lost control of the situation, and Mark finally saw it. He knew there was a secret, something that hadn't yet been revealed. And he was ready to use it as his last trick. The war had begun, and nothing would be the same as before. The silence that followed Mark's last words was suffocating. Emily remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the document spread across the table, her face expressionless. He could see her internal struggle, the shock mixed with fear of realizing that her meticulously prepared plans had been discovered, and worse, that they could be used against her. Mark didn't move, watching each reaction, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness at seeing how the moment had turned in his favor. It wasn't the victory he wanted, but it was the only way to regain some of the control he had lost. "You can't do this," she murmured, finally breaking the silence, her voice wavering. "These documents, they can't be used against me like this. That's not fair, Mark." "Fair?" Mark almost laughed, but there was more pain than irony in his voice. "Are you really talking about justice now, Emily? After everything you've planned, after everything you tried to rip me off behind my back?" He shook his head in disbelief. "I never wanted this, I never wanted us to get to this point. But you forced me to. And now? I'm going to use whatever it takes to make sure you don't win." His words echoed through the room, heavy and definitive. Emily took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure, but her hands were shaking, and Mark saw it. She knew she was in a delicate position, that any false move could ruin what remained of her chances of escaping unharmed. But there was something more, something Mark couldn't define. A gleam in her eyes, something that looked like a mix of desperation and regret. "You think you're in control, but you're not," she said, suddenly firmer, more resolute. "You think you've figured it all out, but you still don't understand. I didn't do it out of malice, Mark. I did it because I didn't see any other way out. Because I needed to free myself from a life that no longer belonged to me. And yes, I made bad choices, but I also made sacrifices. Things you will never understand." She hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to continue. "And maybe that's why I never told you what was really going on." Mark frowned, confused. He knew there was something she was hiding, something that hadn't yet been revealed, but the intensity with which she spoke left him intrigued. "What are you trying to say, Emily? What kind of sacrifices?" She stared at him, her eyes shining with a mix of emotion he hadn't seen in a long time. "I know you're angry, and rightfully so. But before you make any decisions, before you do something that can't be undone, I need you to know why I did what I did." Emily moved a little closer, trying to find some compassion in his eyes. "You think I was planning to just run away and take everything that was yours, but the truth is I was trying to survive." "Survive what?" Mark's voice was low but full of frustration. "You had it all, Emily. A marriage, a home, a comfortable life. What were you trying to escape?" She hesitated before answering, as if the words were difficult to form. "I was trying to escape myself. From that person you wanted me to be, but that I could never truly be. And at the same time, I knew that if I just walked away, I would lose everything, including myself. That's why I planned to leave with a part of what we built. Not to destroy you, but to try to find some kind of peace." Mark felt a lump tighten in his throat. He wanted to feel angry, he wanted to maintain the firmness he had since the beginning of that conversation, but something in her voice, in the way she sounded so fragile and desperate, disarmed him a little. He didn't know if it was her attempt to manipulate him, or if she was finally showing something genuine. And it was this uncertainty that tortured him. "And what did you expect me to do? For me to just let you destroy everything and pretend everything was fine?" "No," she said, and her voice broke, almost like a whisper. "I expected you to hate me. Because if you hated me, it would be easier for me to leave. I didn't expect you to find out everything this way, but I also never thought that maybe you still cared." Her words were confusing, but Mark understood what she meant. He realized that, in a way, she was trying to justify her actions with a twisted reason, a reason that made sense only to someone who was desperately trying to find a way to free herself from something that held her back. You think I don't care? He asked, voice now softer, more tired. If I didn't care, I wouldn't be here, trying to understand why you did this. Emily took a step back, as if Mark's proximity was unbearable at that moment. I didn't want it to end like this, she said, her eyes beginning to fill with tears. But I knew there was no other way. I knew that if I was honest from the beginning, you would never let me go. So you chose to betray me? He said, once again, pain evident in his voice. You preferred to lie, deceive, and expect me to just accept it when it all came out. I was scared, she admitted, finally letting the tears flow. Fear of losing everything. Fear of losing myself. And when I found myself cornered, I made decisions that I know were wrong, but they were the only ones I could see. Mark wanted to say something, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. He felt the weight of everything that had been said, of everything that still needed to be resolved, and he realized that even after all the lies, he still cared. And that was what hurt the most. I still don't understand, Emily, he said, softly. But I want to understand. I really want to know what made you do this. She looked up at him, quickly wiping away her tears with the back of her hands. Then let me explain. But know that what I have to say will change everything. And it won't be easy to hear. Mark felt his heart sink, but he nodded slowly. Okay. I'm listening. And in that moment, he knew that the moral dilemma he faced was not just about her betrayal, but about the decision he would have to make at the end of it all. Because he knew that, somehow, there were still feelings for her, feelings that he couldn't just erase. And he would need to decide if those feelings were enough to forgive or if they were the reason he needed to leave her forever. Silence stretched between them for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Emily took a deep breath, knowing that she was about to say something that would forever change the course of that story, and that would perhaps seal their fate forever. The silence that hung over the room seemed unbearable. Emily knew that by speaking out she would be taking a risk, but there was no turning back. Mark watched her every move, waiting for the truth that would finally come to light, the secret that was buried behind all those lies. Her breathing was slow and hesitant, and he realized how difficult this was. But he also knew it was necessary. I never planned for things to turn out this way, she began, her voice breaking. But there was a moment when I realized there was no way out, that I was trapped in something I couldn't control. I needed a plan to get out, but I didn't know how. And so, I did what I did, trying desperately to find a way to free myself. Mark expected this, a vague explanation, full of half-truths, but what came next was completely different. Emily continued, and he could see that she was struggling to remain calm as she spoke. You think I wanted to deceive you, betray you, but what you don't know is that I had done it before. But it wasn't to be with someone else. It was to save someone I love. Mark frowned, not understanding. What are you saying, Emily? Who are you trying to save? She took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears again, but this time there was something different. A mixture of guilt and sadness. My sister. I was trying to help my sister. She got into a complicated situation, got involved with dangerous people, and I was forced to make choices to protect her. They knew I had access to her money, to our house, and forced me to collaborate, or her life would have been in danger. Mark felt as if the ground was moving beneath his feet. He never imagined there was something like this behind Emily's behavior. But it was still difficult for him to understand how this justified the lies and betrayal. And why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for my help, Emily? We could have worked this out together. Instead, you chose to lie to me, stab me in the back. She shook her head slowly, tears finally streaming down her cheeks. Because I knew that if I told you, you would never let it happen. You would confront them, you would try to resolve things in a way that would put everyone in danger. And I couldn't risk that. I couldn't risk it. I could let my sister be hurt. So I did what they asked. And part of that meant pushing you away, making it look like I was cheating on you so you wouldn't get involved. Mark remained silent, absorbing every word. He was confused, torn between anger at his betrayal and compassion for Emily's despair. It all made sense in a twisted way, but still, he couldn't accept that she had chosen to deal with this alone, that she had preferred to lie and deceive him rather than trust him. "You didn't have to do that, Emily," he said, his voice low, filled with sadness. "I could have helped. I would have done anything to protect you and your sister." "I know," she replied, sobbing, her voice barely audible. "But I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, everything would fall apart. I was caught between protecting you and saving her life. And in the end, I ended up destroying everything." Mark looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the full truth. He saw how much she had fought, how much she had suffered in silence, and how much those wrong decisions had consumed her. But still, he couldn't ignore the fact that she chose to lie. "So this whole thing, this whole plan, was it to keep me away? To trick me into trying to figure it out on my own?" Emily nodded, unable to say anything else. She expected the outburst of anger, expected him to say it was over, that he could never forgive her. But instead, Mark just sighed, a heavy sigh, as if he was letting go of an immense weight. "I wish I could hate you, Emily. I wish I could just say it's over and I'll never look back," he said, voice breaking. "But I can't. Because even after everything you've done, I still care." His words seemed to go through her like a blade. Emily closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears, but it was impossible. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she whispered. "I know I ruined everything. I just wanted to protect you." "Protecting doesn't mean lying," he replied, firmer now. "Protecting means trusting. And you broke that trust in a way that I don't know if I'll ever be able to recover." Emily knew this was the reality. She knew that, as much as she had good intentions, the choices she made had hurt Mark in a way that might never heal. But she also knew that he had the right to know everything, that he needed to understand the full story in order to move forward, with or without her. "I'm going to turn myself in," she said suddenly, and Mark stared at her, surprised. "I'm going to tell everything. To the police, to the lawyers. I'm going to take responsibility for all my choices, and try to save what I can. Maybe I can protect my sister in a way that doesn't involve more lies. And, who you know, someday you'll be able to forgive me." Mark was silent for a long moment, processing what she had just said. He knew this was the only way for both of them to move forward. Emily needed to deal with the consequences of her actions, and he needed to find a way to deal with the pain he felt. "That's your decision," he said finally. "And I hope that, in some way, this brings you the peace you've been searching for." Emily took a step forward, almost as if she wanted to hug him, but stopped herself. She knew she had no right to ask this now. "I'm sorry, Mark," she repeated, the words filled with a sincerity he had never seen before. "I hope that one day you can find someone who makes you truly happy." He didn't respond. He just watched her as she picked up her bag and left the office, knowing that this would be the last time they would have a conversation like that. And as the door closed behind her, Mark felt a mixture of relief and sadness. It was the end of something that had started with so much love and so much promise, but ended in pain and disappointment. He knew he would need time to heal the wounds, and that he might never find all the answers he was looking for. But for now, he was at peace with the truth, painful as it was. Did you like the story? Leave your comment and share your opinion about this ending. What would you have done in Mark or Emily's place? We want to know. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, which show how betrayal and disloyalty can devastate lives. Here, we in no way support any type of betrayal, and we believe that respect and honesty are the basis of any healthy relationship. Until next time.